Well, if the rule isn't right, should you follow it? This seems to be a pretty significant question for our world and for every community that's made rules for itself throughout its history. While it's right to follow the rules, most of us would agree with that. What do you do if the rules aren't right? Do you follow the rules because they're rules? Do you follow the spirit of the rules, if not the letter? Do you have to understand the rules to follow them? And when should you ignore or protest the rules? If you can get away with it, is it okay to not follow the rules? What if they're not fair? Well, if you think the Christian tradition might have a single answer to this question, you haven't been paying attention. If you think society has a good answer to this question, you haven't been paying attention. Do you, for example, think that it's important to stop at a stop sign on a gravel road in the middle of nowhere when no one is around? Do you think you must wear a mask in your store? When you're the only one in the counter, there is someone in the back and the customers are at least 30 feet away. Do you think you should be able to go and visit your aging parents if you are COVID careful, even when there's a stay-at-home order? Do you avoid ending a sentence with a preposition at all costs? To avoid that problem, Winston Churchill allegedly wrote, "This is the type of errant pedantry up with which I will not put." We are in many ways struggling with all these kinds of questions about rules and guidelines and what's right and right for whom. And there are often questions about whether there are separate rules for the ones who understand the system and the ones who don't understand the system and know how to work it for their own needs. Lots of people have been asking lately, are there separate rules for white lives and black lives and people of color's lives? Are there separate rules for the rich and for the poor? And so we've heard over the last few years about the wealthy parents who were caught buying their kids' entrance into those elite schools in the States. Some people have been going to jail. And just this week, a Vancouver couple was arrested. Well, I think arrested. They're certainly going to court. Caught for flouting the COVID-19 rules because they chartered a plane to Beaver Creek, Yukon, claimed they were employees at a local motel so that they could get one of the first doses of the Moderna vaccine prioritized there because the community is so very isolated from other medical care, and so should the virus take hold, they're all very vulnerable. Meanwhile, this past week, the news is full of also weird and confusing things from Wall Street. If you follow Wall Street, maybe this makes sense. If you don't, it's kind of mind-boggling. But you see, Reddit's social media group called Wall Street Bets decided to blow up some stock from the store GameStop with this flurry of small-time investments. And the activity inflated GameStop stock by a tremendous amount, which would only make a difference for them and for GameStop, except that there were these major investors and hedge funds who'd been betting on that stock to fail. And so these small individual investors working together on Reddit flaunted the understood rules of Wall Street. And they did that not just with GameStop, but with some other unpopular stocks too, like Nokia and BlackBerry. And in this kind of David versus Goliath sort of event, they squeezed hedge funds and Wall Street investors into losing something like $70 billion. E-trading apps have started to lock down the practice, but not before it started to raise really significant questions about how the stock trading system works and for whom. Jesus was well known for not following the rules of his church and his country when they weren't right, particularly to make a point about who was being served by the system. But in today's reading, that's not what happens at all. Paul tells his friends that they should follow the rules, even though he knows and they know that they're not right. Well, this is an interpretation we're not used to hearing. Ordinarily, whether the rules are right or not is really the only thing that determines how we decide whether to follow them or fight them. But as we all know, the world is a lot more complicated than that. And it's way more complicated now than it was in biblical times, but even then, it wasn't so clear. So the Corinthians believers of the first century, surrounded as they were by so many gods and different cultures and worship of various people who lived in that rich city, were pretty confused about this new religion that they belonged to following Christ, and they were really confused about what they were supposed to do. What does Christ want from us? And what do we do in this context where it's so multicultural? And so they wrote to Paul to say, we have some questions. And among them is the question about diet. Because they had all of these food rules from, Leviticus. And so was it proper, they wanted to know, to eat the meat of animals that had been sacrificed to a pagan god? This was practiced widely in the Roman world. They would offer the whole animal as a sacrifice at their temple, and then the meat would be finished cooking and sliced and sold at the market. And some of the new Christians who'd been educated to the idea that, okay, these idols and these gods are false, they're not real. They felt free to, okay, well then we can buy and eat the meat. Meat is meat and meat is meat. Nothing happened to it in that process. But others were afraid that by eating it, they'd fall into the sin of idol worship. And that was clearly against the rules. And so they wouldn't buy it and they wouldn't eat that meat. Now, other meat was pretty hard to find in their culture. So mostly they just were left with vegetables. So they said to Paul, tell us, what are the rules? Can we eat the meat or not? It's clear that Paul agreed with those he calls knowledgeable, who says they get the difference between following the letter and the spirit of the law. He agrees with them. There's lots of the laws we used to follow that we don't need to follow because we don't need them to keep us faithful. But he says, sometimes that knowledge of ours makes us act superior to others around us. And we start making our own rules. And when we make our own rules, it can be really confusing to those around us who don't understand why we made them. As I was reading that this week, I thought, that sounds very familiar to me. Why does that sound so familiar to me? And I remembered hearing something at a press conference. Sounded something like this. Yes, you're right. Technically, if the grandparents are coming to your house as your two, your going to their house is no different if that's all the six of you are ever doing. But that can be really confusing for those who don't know what you're doing and only see four people walking into their neighbor's house. Okay, back to Paul, because Paul's not done. He continues by saying, our understanding and our own personal knowledge only gets us so far. And if it becomes everything, some people end up as know-it-alls who treat others as know-nothings. It doesn't help us share that knowledge. No, we keep it to ourselves and then act like we're the only ones who know anything. And sometimes it does encourage us to make separate rules just for us, because, we know what we're doing. And then it makes us think that the other rules don't apply to us. And this I think we see lived out in our world all of the time. Countless people who are determining that the rules of one kind don't apply to them. This is what leads the rest of the world to feel like we have one set of rules for a privileged group and another set of rules for a less privileged group. And ironically, none of us ever think that we're part of the less privileged group. Or no, we all think we're part of the less privileged group. None of us think we're part of the privileged group. We are really great at noticing how others are not following the rules. And also, similarly, really great at justifying and excusing our own steps around the rules. I get this, I really do, because I do it myself. And I do it because I'm just so clear about the inconvenience to me and the effects on me and the things I want to do and the things I need to do. So there I am on the highway, a little late to my appointment, saying, how dare they cut me off, while excusing the speedometer that's only 8 over the speed limit, because I know they don't ticket you when you're only 8 over the speed limit. But I'm over, aren't I? The truth is, says Paul, those who think they know everything clearly have a lot more to learn. We know, for example, there's countless different interpretations and opinions about what rules there should and shouldn't be about who should receive vaccinations and when. And I have to confess I don't have to, but I'm going to confess something to you. I was really surprised to notice my internal initial reaction. I read a friend's post on Facebook yesterday that she had received her first dose of vaccine. And my first response inside was, sadly, well, why did she get it? They don't have any cases there. Now, I'm admitting this to you only to show you how easy it is for us to get swept up in our own interpretations, our own feelings, our own jealousies, rather than what might be best for more isolated and vulnerable populations, what might be best if we looked at the whole and bigger picture that I don't get a glance at. So we still have the problem, don't we, that the New Corinthian church had way, way back then. We want rules. We want rules that fit our needs and our wants. We want clear rules that are right for everyone as long as they feel like they're right for us. Fortunately, says Paul, God doesn't grade us on whether we follow the rules for rules' sake. But God does care how you use your knowledge and how you use your freedom. God cares about whether your following of the rules is about your wants or your love. Because me is just one. We includes me and everyone else. And God cares about we. In fact, if anyone can remember way back to October when we talked about the 10 Commandments, this week it occurred to me, I know, should have occurred to me sooner, that Paul says pretty much what we noticed about the commandments that day. God's rules are there to help you love your neighbor. So in this case, Paul says pretty much the same thing. Technically, sure, you can eat the meat, and if it was just me, I'd probably choose to do that. I'd feel free to do that. But if my eating meat is going to harm my neighbor in some way, count me in as a vegetarian. If it helps to show a good example, I'll give up my right for that. So, how about people trying to be faithful today? The specific rules and guidelines for our lives have changed a great deal over the last year, even since October, when we were last thinking about rules in this space. And I feel like I am less clear now than I was then about what the exact rules should be or what they're going to be a month from now. But interestingly, the guidance from our faith tradition remains remarkably consistent. Now, for those who want a clear-cut, one-size-fits-all answer, you're going to still be disappointed in me. Do we follow the rules? Well, probably, mostly. Do we not follow the rules? Maybe. It depends on who made them and why they made them and who they're for and who they protect and who they serve. It depends on what you teach people and what you tell them about what you think of them by what they see in your behavior. Did you follow rules for their sake? Did you protest rules for their sake? What do they learn by watching you? Rules are for the building up and the care of the society. And if what really builds us up is love, the answer might be super hard to operationalize, as they say, really hard to live out, but the answer, the concept, is still pretty simple. It's as close as we can get to a one-size-fits-all answer, and it's love. Whether it's about stocks or masks or communication, what if we used love for others as our touchstone and our guide? Hard to do, but worth it, don't you think? What if love for others was our yardstick, our rule, and our norm? That sounds familiar too. A song we know, maybe Fred Kahn wrote it. And let our lives portray your word in human form. Now come with us that we may have your wits about us where we live. May it be so. Amen.